Scholar at the Department of Liberal Studies at Holy Cross College at Notre Dame. He earned 2 PhDs, because one is not enough. One in philosophy at the Pontifical University of Holy Cross, and then one before that, PhD in government from Notre Dame. And he studied classics at Columbia and history at Marquette, and his publications include lots of stuff about the French Revolution, conservatism, a lot of big figures, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, Edmund Burke, and in general, I think has a lot of scholarly interest in the intersection of government and religion. And he's going to talk to us about Anscombe and Truman and the bomb, and some of the ideas around just war theory.
Thank you, Will. So I guess first of all, I am not an Anscombe scholar. And actually at this point, I'm not a scholar. I feel I was a scholar. I was an academic, but I think you could say now, in a way, I'm more of an activist. And I think a lot more now about how when I first learned Aquinas, there are some theories about, well, what exactly is the Summa Theologica? And one theory out there is that St. Thomas wrote it to be like a reference book for confessors. And I suppose that is how now more how I use it, right, in my position as an activist. And so I thought that if I were to be teaching a class here, the first thing I would do is, if there were a board, I would write 4 dates on the board. And I'm just going to try to explain, I'm just going to try to go through in my talk some of these dates and maybe their significance. And to make some observations that I think that Anscombe helped me to appreciate. So the first date, obviously, I would put up would be 1956. 1956 is the year that Anscombe opposed Truman. She opposed the university giving Truman an honorary degree. And hopefully during the talk, I'll say something about why she opposed it and what were some of the objections she had to deal with. But then the other date I'd put up is 1992. And there's not perfect symmetry between these dates, I'm sorry. But the reason I put 1992 up is that in 1992, that's my first experience with Anscombe. I went to the Univ Congress in Rome, which in those days was more of an academic congress. Nowadays, it's not so much. But in those days, in those days, they would actually try to invite like keynote speakers who were high-powered academics. And that year, Anscombe was the keynote speaker, and the title of the conference was Possibility, and of course, I think it's significant also from the standpoint of thinking about Truman and Anscombe and Oxford, that the title of the conference that year was Possibilities for Peace, the Challenge of a Modern University. And I have to apologize that, well, when I went to this Univ Congress in 1992, I went with 2 other students, and the guy that took us had 0 interest in academic things. And it's also understandable, we were only in Rome for 7 days. So he basically said, all you need to know about this lady is that she's a great philosopher, she has 7 children, and she smokes cigars. And then I think we went in, whatever auditorium she was giving the speech in, we went in, and I don't remember anything of what she said, unfortunately. And I've tried to track down, and I contacted the Univ organizers, and they don't keep files going back that far. So they couldn't tell me anything either, other than just the title of the talk for what she said. Then I would also write down 2009, because in 2009, when I was at Notre Dame, I was kind of more of an observer than anything else of the efforts of some students at the university to oppose giving Obama an honorary degree. And I think in many ways it was a very Anscombian moment at Notre Dame for these students. And then, of course, finally, I would write 2019 on the board, which is where are we right now, and how would Anscombe encourage us to form ourselves right now? And so I would also then say, you know, I was thinking about this talk, well, what is it for me exactly? Because I used to be an academic. Now I'm more of an activist, you might say. That's a euphemism, but it's kind of, so it's, what I'm presenting here is not exactly, like, there are some Socratic dialogues. So what I'm presenting here is an exercise a little bit in memory, my own memories. And so, but it's not exactly a Socratic dialogue. There's some Socratic dialogues that start with, like, somebody's meeting somebody and they have a memory of meeting somebody when, you know, they're older, but they have a memory when they were younger of meeting someone who was older, right? And there's this whole back and forth between memory. There's a kind of back and forth, what is memory? And that leads, it's kind of hypnotic almost, right? To talk about memory in that way. And that's why sometimes Socrates would get accused of being a hypnotist, or the equivalent of a hypnotist, right? So it's a little bit that, right? And I was thinking, well, also it could be, the other extreme would be like, we all know these people who are high school athletes, played basketball or football, and they, after they're 25 or 26, they spend the rest of their life talking about their exploits as athletes in high school, right? So this talk is something in between. It's something in between the reflection on memories to maybe just reminiscing a little bit about my own memories as an academic. And again, just to say a few more things, as I mentioned, I did go to this UNIV Congress in 1992 where Elizabeth Anscombe was speaking about the possibilities for peace, the challenge of a modern university. When I was a graduate student at Notre Dame, I would have conversations. I had some conversations with David Solomon about Anscombe, her life, and her writings. And as a professor at Notre Dame, I would occasionally have lunch with Alistair McIntyre, and Anscombe would come up. Her examples would come up. And then I went to this conference in 2000. So the year that Obama came to Notre Dame, I went to this conference at Santa Croce in Rome. Professor Vogler was present at that conference as well. Were you there? The one in Rome? Okay. But, and actually at that conference, that was my real first substantive encounter, you might say, as an academic with Anscombe. And it was precisely reading and commenting on this. We had a seminar on this essay of hers on Truman and the bomb. And so if we go back now to 1956, one of the things that when I first read this essay on Truman and the bomb, and I think it's clear to kind of just, I think her position, and again, one of the other panelists could correct me, but I basically took her position to be that we should not grant Truman an honorary degree. Why? Because, well, part of politics is to whom do you give the offices and to whom do you honor, right? And so I think her point was, and even when she presented her proposal to some of the committees at the university, they came back at her with a number of objections to her position. And one of them was, for example, we shouldn't punish Truman, right? And her response was, I'm not saying we should punish Truman, right? I'm not saying that we should bring him to court and punish him. I'm just saying I don't think he did anything to merit this honor, right? So the point she was making is that when he directed, and actually I don't think it's, well, let's just limit it to this, yeah. When he directed the bombs to be dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, he was directing actions to murder the innocent, right? And this goes back to just war theory. Now, in just war theory, right, there's the right to go to war. There can be discussions about whether to go to war or not, right? Are you defending yourself against an aggressor? Is the aggression serious and imminent, right? And also, do you think you can actually repel what the aggressor is trying to do? right? Those are the basic, some of the questions around just war theory, whether to go to war in the first place or not. But then there's also this question of how do you carry out the war, right? How do you justly carry out the war? And of course, the fundamental thing she's interested in this debate is you cannot murder the innocent. Or you cannot kill the innocent, which is murder. And it's in this essay also where she goes into this distinction that Professor Wicks mentioned earlier, where she says, I'm not a pacifist, right? I'm not arguing here for pacifism, because she says pacifism kind of tends to collapse the distinction between killing and murder. And then it can very easily lead to, well, if war just involves evil, killing of all people, then, well, you just got to do bad things in war, you got to kill people. She also mentions in her essay, right, the injustice of requiring unconditional surrender, and also the real question of what was the Japanese stance with respect to the Russians. About bringing to basically, she was trying to show that she was kind of musing, I think, trying to think about, it probably wasn't the case that the Japanese were just going to hold out to the bitter end. They probably had something to do with their relationship with the Russians. And that was a little bit the purpose of the second article that I gave, that these researchers who are now looking into more the notes that the Japanese general, the notes of the meetings of the Japanese general over that summer, which culminated in the dropping of the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that the generals, that already in that summer before the bombs were dropped, the United States had undertaken this incredible bombing campaign of a significant number of Japanese cities, in which a half to 2/3 of those cities were destroyed, right? And there was no notice given in advance that this would be done, right? Civilians were not given a chance to escape. So I think her argument is that I think her argument would be, but certainly in the case of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, right, that already in many of these bombing campaigns before the atomic bomb was dropped, there was already serious violation of you shall not kill the innocent in war. But clearly in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the civilians were not given a chance to leave the cities, right? Which is like one of the things you would want to do if you're going to bomb a city. You would want to give notice. If you're going to carry out jus in bello, right? A just war while it's going on. So then also in this article, right? In this article, what they point out is that if you look at the debates of the Japanese generals, they were basically holding out to see if if the Soviet Union would remain neutral or declare war on them before they dealt with surrendering to the United States, right? Because Russia, the Soviet Union, had kind of signed a neutrality pact with the Japanese in 1941. They hadn't officially declared war as of June 1945. And so the notes of the Japanese generals show that what these researchers point out is that even after the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the question that the Japanese generals were more interested in is, will the Russians stay neutral or not to give us some leverage in negotiating peace with the United States? Right? And as a matter of fact, I think it was on August 8th, the Soviets officially declared war on the Japanese, leading the generals to say, okay, yeah, we just got to submit to the United States and agree to their terms of surrender. We will get no negotiating leverage from the Soviet Union. So so I guess the reason I included this article, there's also, I think, a defect in this article that Anscombe would point out, is that the authors of this article seem to be pacifists, right? They don't seem to be making this distinction between killing and murder. in the way that they're treating even with the final days of the that led to the Japanese surrender. So Anscombe's essential point was not that we should punish. We're not here to punish Truman. That's beyond that's beyond our competence as a university, right? But as a university, we do have a choice whether to honor this man or not. And I think her basic position was we shouldn't honor someone who has killed the innocent. We shouldn't give that person honor, even though that's kind of a small thing. And she said, well, to do otherwise is essentially flattery. I think that's the best, or being psychophants, right? So what really struck me about Anscombe's doing this in 1956 is that in the wider kind of political context, there's an interesting book written by Murray Friedman, who's a historian at the University of Pennsylvania. It's kind of the history of neoconservatism, right, within the context of the Cold War and everything. And it's an interesting book from this standpoint because you can see that already, and there's a number of books that go into this right now. Already by the late 50s, early 60s, you're into the Cold War, right? You're into these efforts, and especially in the United States, right? You're into these efforts to a lot of secular liberals. So by the 1950s, you get these political movements that are, secular liberals or mainline Protestants who are very powerful, who see Catholics as potential allies in ending the Cold War. So, for example, but also, you see movements forming within the political parties. Neoconservatism is what gets